In this video, I'm going to show you how to prep, mask and spray paint your walls. Start by sanding all the areas down first. Then mask up the radiators and any electrical sockets that you don't want any paint going on. Then of course your windows and window frames. Dilute your paint if you're using a paint sprayer, give it a good mix up, then pour it into the reservoir and fasten the lid on. Test the paint flow on a piece of cardboard and then you're ready to start spraying your walls. I normally spray up and down from top to bottom and then I'll do a second coat from left to right. Then before it dries, remove the masking tape. Then you can touch up the ceiling and cut in your skirting boards using your paintbrush. If you're looking for more 60-second tips, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Mr. and Mrs. DIY. In this video, I'm going to show you how to seal and paint this cast iron window frame. I applied a Frenchie's finishing coat on with a paintbrush. It looks like a white milky substance when you're applying it and it's wet, but once it's dry, it's completely transparent. Once I completed one side, I placed 2 battens on my workbench, turned it over and then painted the other. It only takes a couple of minutes to apply and it dries within a couple of hours. Then it was ready for a second coat. Now the Frenchie finishing coat is dry, it's ready to paint. I'm going to use my paint sprayer, so I'm going to hang this on a piece of line that'll allow me to spray both sides. I'm using Wagner's small handheld paint sprayer and I'm applying Frenchie's Alfresco paint. Once I've applied one coat, I'll leave this to dry for a couple of hours and then apply a second. If you're looking for more 60-second tips, head over to our YouTube channel, Mr. and Mrs. DIY. In this video, I'm going to show you how to prepare and paint wooden picket fencing with Frenchie paint using 3 different methods. Start off by sanding the surface of your fence using an orbital sander. Open your tin of paint, give it a good stir. My first application is using a paintbrush. Then another alternative is using a small radiator roller. Pour the paint into your tray, get plenty on the roller and start to apply on the surface. Then there's paint spraying. You may need to dilute your paint by 10 to 20% until you get a nice smooth runny consistency. Pop on your PPE and then start spraying, making sure you've got dust sheets or cardboard covering the surface below. Apply any finishing touches and you're done. If you want to see more 60-second tips, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Mr. and Mrs. DIY. I'm going to show you how to prepare and paint your garage door so it lasts. Scrub the surfaces down using some sugar soap and a good hard scrubbing brush. Then give it a light sanding down if you don't know what type of paint's been on there originally. Fill in any holes with your filler, leave that to dry and then re-sand it again. Then you can apply some finishing coat. I normally apply this over the filler, so your first coat of paint is going to dry flatter. Now the paint I'm using is from the Alfresco range and the colour is smudge. But I'm applying this on with 3 different methods. The first door using a large paintbrush, then the second door I'm using a small radiator roller. Now the next side of the door I'm using my small handheld paint sprayer. Once it's dry I applied the second coat using the sprayer. Now for the outside frame, I'm going to apply the paint on using a brush. Again, it's the Alfresco range, but this time the colour is blackjack. For more videos, subscribe to the YouTube channel, Mr. and Mrs. DIY. Check your paint dilution. It should be the consistency of a single cream that flows freely off a stirring stick and leaves no trail on the surface. If this is not the case, dilute your paint by 5 to 10%. Check the data sheet of the paint materials to see what you should dilute it with. If it's a water-based paint, with water. If it's an oil or solvent-based, with white spirits or turpentine. The Wagner stirring stick has notches which each represent 10% dilution. If you're still having any issues, you may need to contact Wagner. You can get product support on our social media platforms as well as through the website. This is how I transformed this old fireplace. Started off by by masking the areas up around it. Then cleaned it over using some sugar soap. Once it was scrubbed up, I rinsed it and dried it off. Then I had to sand the surfaces to help the new paint key. A quick dust off and hoover up, and now it's ready to paint. You've got three options of applying your paint. One option is applying it with a paintbrush. Use a large one to spread most of the paint on, then a small brush to feather it out. Or you could use a 4-inch roller. Apply it on and then feather it out with your brush. Or if you happen to have a handheld paint sprayer, this is going to be your quickest option. Once the areas are mashed up, hold the nozzle about 4 inches away from the surface and continue the movement all the way across the area. If you're looking for more 60-second tips, like and subscribe. I'm going to show you how to prepare and paint your metal radiators. Mix up some French sugar soap with some warm water and start to scrub the surface of your item, making sure you clear away all the grease and grime. Then wipe this off with a damp cloth. Once you've dried it, you can give it a gentle sanding down. And if you come across any rust spots, give these a good sanding off, then mask the areas where you don't require any paint. Now you're ready to apply your paint. I'm using French Chic's trim paint, and the colour is Cool Beans. It's part of the Samaritans range. If you're applying it on with a brush, start at one end and work your way up and down, following the contours of the radiator. Then feather over it gently, just to make sure you're spreading it evenly and avoiding any drips. And of course, you can always apply the paint using a radiator roller, but it still needs to be feathered off with a paintbrush. French Chic's trim paint also works amazingly well if you're applying it with a paint sprayer. For more videos like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel, Mr. and Mrs. DIY. In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint your spindles, handrail and Newel post. When painting any item, preparation is really important. First, sand down all the surfaces the best you can. If you're using a paint sprayer, you will need to mask up around the areas that you don't want any paint going on. If you happen to have holes, you will need to fill these with some filler, let that dry and then sand it down and it's ready to paint over. When applying it on with a brush, you may see some brush strokes, but don't worry, they'll flatten out with French Chic paint. If you're using a paint sprayer, you will need to dilute the paint down by about 10%. Test this on a piece of cardboard first, then you're ready to paint. Hold the nozzle about 4 inches away from the surface and continuously move it up and down. Once you've applied your first coat, leave this to dry for 4 to 6 hours and then you can apply a second coat. And of course, you always give it a very light sanding down between coats. For more 60-second tips, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Mr. and Mrs. DIY. I'm often asked, can I use French Chic wall paint in my Wagner paint sprayer? Well, the answer is yes, as long as you dilute it a fraction. Give it a good stir up in your can first, then pour it into the reservoir and add between 5 to 10% water. Stir this up, connect the head, and then you're ready to start paint spraying. I'm using the extension handle on my Wagner, which gives me an extra 2-foot reach, about 600 millimeters, which allows easy access to the ceiling. Now, before you fill the attachment up with your paint, make sure that the paint flow tube is pointing towards the back when you're spraying ceilings like this. This allows the paint to be drawn from the bottom of the reservoir when the paint's running low. As you can see, I've masked up around the sides, covering up the OSB walls so I don't get any overspray on them. When doing a large area like this, I tend to do about 1 meter at a time, spraying it from left to right, covering each pass over by about 50%. Now, this extension handle works with almost all Wagner handheld paint sprayers from the consumer range. And as you can see, after diluting French Chic's paint down, it's flying through the paint sprayer, no problem. Considering this is only the first coat, I've got to admit, it's looking fantastic already. Once you've got your masking in position, this is about 4 or 5 times quicker than using the old-fashioned way of using a paintbrush and roller. Once you've applied your first coat, leave this to dry for about 20 minutes, then you can apply your second layer in a cross-coat fashion. When you're spraying indoors and above your head, do be sure to wear a dust mask and some safety specs. Hopefully I've inspired you to paint spray your ceilings. If you're looking for more inspiration, follow us on all social media handles and don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Mr. and Mrs. DIY.